right, John. I've really not looked over these questions, except when you first sent them in. The reason that I took some time to do this is because I thought, well, I just answer them impromptu, which can be dangerous. But with that said, here goes. Well, John, I'm from Ohio, just between Dayton and Cincinnati, so growing up, had my choice of a lot of great radio stations, particularly in Cincinnati. Not a whole lot to talk about in Dayton, but did get to listen to Louisville. Could pick up WAKY in the daytime pretty easily there in Ohio. So that station was a big influence. In fact, my goal was to go either there or to WSAI in Cincinnati, which is pretty ballsy for a 13-year-old kid working in Middletown, Ohio at a radio station. My first station was in Middletown, and I worked there for about 6 or 7 years, clear through college. Let's see, I came to WAKY. Well, actually, I went to Louisville. I worked at WKLO for about a year as soon as I got out of school. And I got fired from there on Christmas Eve and waited out a 6-month radius contract, which said that I could not work at another AM station in Louisville for 6 months. So I went to work at a sign-on adult standard station, which I absolutely loved. My parents were both musicians, not by trade, but by hobby. So I grew up on what people back then said good music. So that was a real treat in the adult standard thing. Let's see here. The owners of WAKY were two of them when I was there for my 10 years. The first was Lin Broadcasting, L-I-N, which stood for Louisville, Indianapolis, Nashville. They never did have a station in Indianapolis, so go figure on that one. Then about midstream, we were sold to Multimedia, which was out of North Carolina. And the companies were very similar. I never had a whole lot of company influence one way or the other with them. They just kind of left us alone, which is pretty cool. The WAKY KLO rivalry. Well, I don't know how long it went on before I got there, but when I was in Louisville and first went to Louisville, WAKY and KLO were battling neck and neck. And KLO actually was started to lead in teens. WAKY had a spot load of about 16 minutes an hour and KLO about 8 minutes an hour. So WAKY was not making a lot of headway there. WAKY ended up winning and got better numbers than KLO. What we did when I went over to WAKY, we took the thing more of a personality approach. Fun-loving to go with the call letters WAKY. Musically, in retrospect, I guess that we were all over the place. We played some country crossovers. But primarily, every fourth record, I had this built into the music clocks, every fourth record was an R&B record. Not necessarily a new one, but we generally took the lead on the R&B station there in Louisville. And what was popular on their station, we would add on our playlist. And the same thing with the country crossovers from the country station. And then everything else is pretty much straight ahead top 40. But it was kind of what they call rhythmic CHR today. That was kind of what the music thing was at WAKY, with some country stuff thrown in. Boy, go figure. You know, come out of a song and you're out of a spot set, go into Love Man by Otis Redding, then go into Freddie Fender. Got to scratch your head on that one, but it seemed to work. That's how WAKY differed from other parts of the country. We were quite a bit more rhythmic oriented than, for example, Columbus was, or even Cincinnati. Okay, on the country record, Behind Closed Doors, Charlie Rich, they gave me a gold record on that. It's ironic because in my high school yearbook, you know, they asked what your favorite food is and favorite singer and all that stuff, and I put my favorite singer is Charlie Rich. I remember my classmates saying, you know, who? Charlie Rich? Never heard of him. I was always a Charlie Rich fan and always thought that he should have a hit, even though he had that one Lonely Weekends song in '59. I always thought that he needed a big mass appeal hit. And the lady that worked with Epic Records knew that, and she had an acetate, as they called it at the time, and brought it down and said, "What do you think of this? We just signed Charlie Rich. Here's a song." I said, "Man, that's the one." On it goes, and we were playing it that afternoon, and she ran with it, and the rest is history on that. On the song "You Don't Bring Me Flowers," I guess I get associated with that. I really had nothing to do with that song directly. That was another guy, and he wrote it for a former girlfriend of mine. So when I said I didn't have anything to do with that directly, or indirectly, I guess I did. But he had the sweets for her after she and I broke up. So that's how that came about. The WAKY Showcase Studios. Well, coming from WKLO, they had a showcase studio, and WAKY was convinced that they had to have one. So I talked him into at least recessing it back a little bit so there was some room. So when the derelicts came and banged on the window with $half, you wouldn't be able to hear them. So that worked out a lot better there at WAKY. Processing. Oh, my. Well, I'm a processing nut, I got to tell you. And I've spent my life fussing with engineers, and WAKY was no exception. We processed the following way. We came out of the control board. It's all going to sound kind of screwy now. I rolled off the low end and boosted the high end. Then it went into a Marty compressor that they don't make anymore. And it was just an AGC thing. And I had souped the thing up to increase the release time. And we compressed about 30 dB, an awful lot. Then I went from there into a unit that CBS built. I think it was called a dynamic presence equalizer. But what it was, it equalized in the 5 kC range as needed. So if you had a muddy commercial or a muddy song, it would bring up that 5 kC range. Or if you had something with excessive frequency response in that range, it'd bring it back down. So that's what went out of the building. It went through a Grundig reverb system, which is as big as any piano you ever saw in your life. And in fact, when they did some work back there in the back of the building where we had the reverb, and come to find out after they put some walls in, you couldn't get the reverb out. The reverb was there, I guess, forever and ever. And I think it's still over there. But anyway, there's some of these plate reverbs. They had big, huge plates on the thing, and I boosted the high some more there. So after we do all this high boost, then we would roll it off at 8 kC. We had a program line that one would roll off at 15 kC, the other rolled off at 8 kC, and the 8 kC always sounded better. Then it would go out to the transmitter about 16 miles away. And out there it went into a typical, what they had at the time was a CBS Volumax, which I had snuck the keys to the transmitter and gone out there and fiddled around with it so that the meter did not read true. The meter would actually be almost on the peg in the red, but it was showed in the green area, so it was hitting a lot harder than normal because, the engineers don't like anything in red. So that was basically the processing. Oh, I forgot one more thing on the processing. When Bailey was on, since Bailey would have a lot of pauses and that type of thing, I had the compression down to about 10 dB. Then when he went off, it automatically kicked into about 30 dB because the basic requirement was, well, everything had to be done over intros and extros. So that way, that kept the whole thing tight, kind of like a Reader's Digest. And as a result, it always just sounded real compressed. But if there was not music under you and you paused, there's so much compression it would bring up a squeal in your headphones, which you can hear on some of the WAKY air checks. WAKY jingle packages. Well, Yeah, I went to Dallas a couple times in recording sessions. Had no idea what they were doing. To this day, I don't. A guy'd walk in. He's a drummer, and he'd go, boom, boom, boom. Out he'd go. Somebody else come in with the guitar, go, feral, feral, and out they go. And so I just kind of sitting there, and I'm sure they did that just to intimidate me. They did. Bill Bailey, the Duke of Louisville. Well, here's an interesting story. Bill's real name, by the way, is Bill Bohan. He was at WKLO when I was. And then I went over to WAKY. And one of the things I wanted to do was to get Bailey out of town. So I sent tapes all over the place, kept making calls. Finally talked WLS in Chicago into hiring him, and so we got him out of the market because we couldn't get him for 6 months. So we figured, well, he's gone forever. If we can't have him, we don't want the other guys in town to have him. So he was up in Chicago, but he was not happy. I listened to him on the air, and you could just tell he wasn't happy. So I had some conversations with him, kind of find out the PD had weather logged, say at 11 after the hour, and if it ran 30 seconds late for Bailey to get into the weather, get hotlined. And you don't do that to old Bailey. Bailey does not respond well to heavy formatics, if you will. Bailey likes to kind of do his thing, and do his thing very well. I mean, here's a guy with the greatest numbers in Louisville history. So who am I to go in there and try to make a Formula jock out of the guy? Besides, it's his own admission, he was not that good on the board. So he was an entity in his own. And I don't know why he left WAKY. I really don't. But he's retired today and lives in Louisville. Gary Burbank. Boy, oh boy, what a guy he is. Real name is Billy Purser. He used the name, what was the name? Johnny Apollo. We hired him from a black station in Memphis, which is where he's from. Notable stories of Burbank. Well, they're out there, and they no doubt are all true. And Gary, I just read the other day where he just signed up for his 20th year at WOW in Cincinnati. And Gary still has the fire in the belly today. I still keep up with him. And he's enthusiastic today as he was then, and is just a great guy. He left WAKY. There's a couple things he wanted to do. Burbank wanted to be working in a top 10 market on his own terms. But first, he wanted to be a program director. And Gary, as creative as he is not a program director. I always had this theory that the better the jock, the worse the program director they make. I'm probably just doing that for my own self-satisfaction. But Gary left WAKY, went to New Orleans, and as a program director, ended up putting his fist through one part of the wall and his head through the other part of the wall in frustration. So after about 6 months, then he did leave there and went over to Detroit at CKLW for several years and missed Louisville all along, and then came back. And Gary does what Gary does best. And that is the Gary Burbank Show, and that's where he is today, and that's why he's been so enormously successful. And it's just, and not only an incredible talent, but an incredible person. Gary is like the brother I never had. By the way, I guess you've heard how Gary Burbank got that name. Since he was Johnny Apollo, coming into WAKY, and I was Johnny Randolph, and the only night guy was a guy named Johnny Locke. 3 Johnnies on one station in Gulf Live. So the show Laugh-In was popular at the time. Gary Owens in beautiful downtown Burbank. So that's how we got the name, Gary Burbank. Coyote Calhoun. Well, John, here's another piece of work. He came to WAKY via Knoxville, Tennessee. I had heard about this guy named Jack Diamond who worked at a little AM station in Knoxville. And so I started calling around to radio stations to see if where they would put up their telephone receiver next to the radio so I could hear him. And the signal was so bad, it took me about 5 tries to find someone that could hear the station. So he's Jack Diamond doing his thing, and I basically hired him. Changed his name to Coyote Calhoun because at this time we were just about ready to pull away into the teen thing. We're about even with KLO. We're beating WAKY was beating them in adults. But the teen thing was still a problem due to our excessive commercial load, so I needed somebody who really could step up to the plate and make a difference, and hired Coyote. He was making $150 a week in Knoxville, and I believe he started at $400 a week at WAKY, and the $400 was a set figure. You know, I never asked him what he made. I said, it's $400 a week, and this is what it pays. Can't do any more, can't do any less, or could do less, but I'm not going to, if you're making less, I'm not going to try and knock you down here. So he took the job. Never forget, he had 3 boxes in his car, his worldly possessions. One was a box of Bear checks, another was a box of T-shirts, another was a box of blue jeans. And that was it. And he, absolutely an incredible jock with the teens. Be on the air until 10 o'clock at night, go out partying after that. Go out to the schools, 8 o'clock in the morning, be there for all the homeroom sessions, all the pep rallies. Whenever the book was on, he insisted on working 7 nights a week for consistency's sake. One of the hardest working jocks I ever saw. Coyote has been program director of WAMZ for decades now. His first and only program job got it above all odds. He had left WAKY. WAKY had gone adult contemporary, which obviously he didn't fit, so he got let go. He ended up in Houston. And didn't like it down there at all. And he called me. I said, Randolph, I got to come back to Louisville. I want to be program director of WAMZ, which was an automated country station. I had no jocks. They were that Drake Chenault automation thing. And they had jocks, but they were basically canned jocks. So Calhoun said, you can't be program director of that station because it's owned by the Bingham family, 3-piece suits, and classical music, and, you're a rock and roll cowboy. So he said, I didn't call for you to tell me why I couldn't do it. I want to pick your brain and see how I can become program director of WAMZ. So to kind of humor him, I said, well, I remember a story one time of John Rook when he had WCFL in Chicago. Before he wanted to be PD there, and he went to the powers that be that owned the station. He had a audio-visual presentation about what was wrong with WCFL and what was wrong with WLS and his game plan for putting WCFL on the map, and they bought into it. So Calhoun puts together an ad program, audio-visual, the whole thing. Probably gets a pair of jeans without a hole in the jeans. And anyway, paid for his own plane ticket to Louisville and became music director, and the rest is history. That took guts. But he's a gutsy guy. Lee Masters. Real name, Jarl Moan. We hired him from WIFE in Indianapolis. Lee is an incredibly bright individual. In fact, Lee actually probably did more to keep me on my toes than anyone. And a real talent, understood the demo, understood what we were doing, knew how to have fun. In the back of your mind, you knew that this guy was going to go on to greatness. Not really as a disc jockey, but just on to greatness. He left WAKY, became a manager of a radio station in Louisville, WLRS, for a while. Got a job in El Paso. Put together the E network on cable. And retired very early with $8 million in cash. The guy's bright. His dad and mom were both professors out in Pennsylvania. Mason Lee Dixon. Boy, there's a piece of work. All right, his real name is David Bratcher. I hired him. I used to listen to radio stations a lot. When I was looking for a jock, I was going to start listening to a station. So I hired Mason from a station in Paducah. His name was, out there was Jimmy Rabbit. Well, didn't need any Jimmy Rabbits at WAKY, so we had this very high public affairs commitment where we had to have, like a half-hour public affairs on the air a day. And you could do it at 2 o'clock in the morning, or in our case, 3, so we did. And called the talk show, if you will, stop the music, turn down the compression on the audio processor, and had the Mason-Dixon line. So that's how the name came about, the Mason-Dixon line. Mason is, guy's got a heart of gold, and with formatic sense, he's a train wreck. And I say that lovingly because he does. The guy would do anything in the world for you. But he just did not like formula radio. He didn't like playing the same records over and over again. He wanted to, very intelligent guy, probably too intelligent, because he always wanted to go beyond that. He wanted to educate the public on an album cut 6 deep and stuff like that. So I had to ride herd on Mason quite a bit. And I don't know why. Yes, I do know why he left WAKY. He went to KXOK in St. Louis. Wasn't mad or anything. He just felt that, he'd been doing all nights forever and a day. And he wanted to do something else. So he goes to KXOK in St. Louis. Didn't last very long there. And I don't know what he has done really since then, but today, and this he got into the Indian movement, the astrology movement, that type thing. I've ever heard he lived on an Indian reservation for a while, but the sad thing is, again, today, and this just really breaks my heart, that he works at a convenience store in North Louisville somewhere. Dang, gone. John W. Dude Walker. Here's another Johnny Dark from Memphis. We have more Johnnies floating around. So the Johnny Dark name never did a whole lot for me, so I just said, hey, pick a name, 2 syllables in it. 2-syllable names are easy to remember. He said Walker. I think it was his mother's maiden name. All right, so it was. So he was there. Dude Walker, very straight-ahead guy, very much a family man, has good moral fiber, religious fiber about him, which is certainly more than I can say for the rest of us. And but Walker blended right in. He left WAKY for reasons that I cannot remember, but he did go back to Memphis. He was a TV weatherman, and he is retired. Took a disability because of a heart condition. Jason O'Brien, real name Howard Toole. He is one guy I did not name. He had the name Jay O'Brien when I hired him from a station in Athens, Alabama, and how I found out about him, I don't know. Can't remember. But he was an extremely hardworking guy, a real perfectionist. I'll tell you how much of a perfectionist this guy was. He would, when the record was playing, he'd be playing the next song in cue and rehearsing his break. He did 6 to 10 at night. And absolutely a perfectionist. He would get off the air at 10, go home and go to bed, come back at 4 o'clock in the morning to do his production because his voice was deeper. That's how much of a perfectionist he was. Likeable guy, fun guy. He works for a cable company in Texas today. I'll add one more thing about show prep here. Gary Burbank worked very, very hard on show prep. He had come in with piles of paper strewn all over the control room. Burbank works best when he is organized with show prep and disorganized with putting the whole thing together on the air. It's really kind of interesting to watch him work. It's kind of nerve-wracking to watch him work, but he never seems to miss a cue. And Bailey, on the other hand, did not do show prep. Bailey was just well-read, knew a little bit about everything, and just come in there and sit down and do it. Tom Dooley. I didn't name him either. His real name is Tom Dooley, George Thomas Dooley. He came to WAKY. He was there once before. Actually, he was at WAKY. I did not hire him the first time. My predecessor, Bill Crisp, hired him. And he had left, he transferred to our sister station, WFIL in Philadelphia, went from there to KHJ in Los Angeles. So here's a great story. At KHJ, he was not happy. Not happy at KHJ to an afternoon drive. Well, he wanted to come back to Louisville, and he couldn't get out of his contract. So I told him, I said, well, just do something outrageous on the air, maybe they'll fire you. So he'd given his notice at his apartment complex, had his wife Melanie with the car and the trailer on the back, packed with the furniture and the dogs and everything. Sitting out front of KHJ, and Dooley did that famous rant about Richard Nixon being a communist, played the national anthem, whatever, and they came in and fired him on the air, and he walked out, got in the car, and he drove to Louisville. There he is. Tom became a born-again Christian and is still, to my knowledge, in Dallas working at a Christian station. Let's see, did I forget anybody else? Lee Gray, outstanding communicator, probably one of the best communicators outside of Bailey I ever worked with. Lee led a wild life, did middays at WAKY, ended up going to Texas, a born-again Christian, and married a Louisville girl. He and I played racquetball, like great racquetball player. Unfortunately, he died early. Died probably in 1988 of a heart attack in Houston. The WAKY News Department. Woody Stiles, one of my favorite news people of all time, the late Woody Stiles. You know, you talk about the day the music died. I remember exactly where I was. I was in Grayson County, Kentucky, sitting at an acquaintance poolside when I heard the word that Woody was killed in a private plane crash. But Woody did the afternoon news on WAKY. Yaden did it in the morning. And that's pretty much it. Woody was kind of the forerunner in news approach that they use today. It was conversational. It was, what's the word I'm trying to think of here? It was, I can't think of the word. Human interest. Human interest involved stories and things like that, which Reed Yaden hated. He was a pure newsman. And I was a rock and roll news guy, so Woody delivered the goods. I left WAKY in the end of 1977, last day of the year. I left because AM was not going to last as musically with an 18 share that WAKY usually carried. And I did not want to be there when the 18 share sunk down in double digits, which inevitably was going to do. You can't hold off album rock FM stations, for crying out loud. And besides, there was a CHR station on FM in town. We still had our 18 share, but didn't take a genius to figure out that wasn't going to stick around long. So I chose to leave while we had the 18 share. And never heard another air check of myself or anything until John Quincy sent me a whole bunch of stuff in the year 2003. My first wife had erased all my stuff. We all have first wives in radio, I guess. I recall, and the thing here, somebody said, about the cart machines in the other room. Yeah, I remember, John, you asked me about that. I had a cart machine in the other room, but mainly for space considerations. and you operate it by remote control. But on that cart machine would be the WAKY jingles. And I always liked the WAKY jingles coming out of a song. I always figured, well, the attention span is highest there as opposed to using a jingle coming out of a spot set. So that's why we had the jingles there. Also, they gave the jocks some more time to be personalities, if you will, because my requirement was, that, with the exception of Bailey, that you do all your stuff over the intros and the extras of songs. That's a tough call. Of course, there were some who'd abuse that and do all of 27 seconds over Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix, but, you'd expect that, I suppose. I got the PD job at WAKY, and this is one of my favorite stories ever. I was hired on as the assistant PD, and the PD was never there. Sick aunt, sick himself, that type of thing. So they finally, and even though I was the assistant PD, I was the one that hired Mason Lee and Burbank and Walker because the PD was not there. Well, they ended up firing the PD. They called all the jocks into the conference room. Al Smith, who's manager of Infinity in Fresno. Al Smith was our GM then. He calls all the jocks in and said that he's fired the PD. And a nationwide search would go on for the next PD of WAKY. So Burbank says, well, Al, what about Randolph? And here I'm sitting there. Al says, well, Randolph, he's done a real good job as assistant PD, on and on and on, but he has never been a program director before. Doesn't have the experience. He's pretty young. And Burbank, this is the type of guy Burbank is. He says, I'm going down the street and get a beer. I'll be back in about a half hour. And if Randolph isn't PD, I'm leaving right now. Are you guys with me? And lo and behold, up stands Mason Lee and Dude Walker and Bailey and everybody else. And out the door they go. Down to Coons the Dutchman to have a beer. And here I am sitting here in the conference room with Al Smith. And he said, well, I'll make you interim PD. He said, we'll announce it that you're a program director. But he said, I'm still not convinced you can do it. So they came back. And I was PD and remained there for probably another 10 years or so. I think, am I missing any questions here? Oh, where am I today? Well, I work for Clear Channel. I need to amend that. Clear Channel Communications is the programmer. I've done that for the past several years. Evansville, Indiana, with a cluster of stations right now. The reason I amend that is because about a week ago, we were traded to Regent Communications. So I guess now I'm a Regent guy. But prior to Evansville, I was in Huntsville for a couple years, Nashville for a couple years, Roanoke for a couple of years. And that's when I started doing the moving around. But Clear Channel has moved me all over the place. They just basically say, okay, here's a station, go in and work with it for a while. So that's the reason for the moving around. Now, prior to that, I didn't move that much at all. Ended up getting into station ownership basically after Louisville. And another guy and I built a ground up a little 3-tower AM daytimer in Danville, Kentucky, over by Lexington. And in fact, to this day, I still have my home there. I still have some apartment buildings. What a pain in the butt those things are, but that's going to be retirement someday. So I still consider Danville, Kentucky my home, and it's the address on all my insurance papers and that type thing. So I go to Danville probably about every other week and you must pay the rent, collect the rent, and stuff like that. Let's make sure I answered your questions here, John. Let's see. Stopped up today. I'll give you another story. I have to think of this. I was very bitter for getting fired at WKLO. Thought it was totally unwarranted. The manager did not like my ex-wife. She was a Joan Rivers type and made a scene, I guess, at a Christmas party, and he basically decided anybody that's married to that doesn't work for me, so that was Christmas Eve, and I was out of there. So I'm over WAKY, and we got the rivalry going. I got to paint the picture here a little bit. WKLO's transmitter is in New Albany, Indiana, right across the river from Louisville. Not a remote control situation at the time. Engineer sits there all the time. This one particular engineer that would go on at 4, worked till midnight, he never listened to the station. He always had the speaker off completely, would spend his whole time on the telephone, one telephone line going into the building. That's important to remember. One phone line going into the building. So he was always on it. And I knew that. I never told a soul this story for 7 years, so the statute of limitation would run out, but here's what I did. I went out, took a 90-minute cassette on a cheap cassette player. I recorded nothing but wacky jingles for 90 minutes. 90 minutes of wacky jingles, just back to back. Went to the back of their radio station, climbed up the fire escape. Nobody ever came out the back door. The back of it was in an alley. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm sorry, it's not 4 o'clock either. It was 4 o'clock when the engineer went to work. This is about when everybody went home. So everybody is already home now. So say 6 o'clock. Climb up the fire escape. I knew where the program line went to the transmitter. So I went up there and I had a couple alligator clips on the output of the cassette recorder. I severed the program line from the studio to the transmitter. Took the 2 alligator clips coming out of their cassette recorder, put them onto the program line, turned on the recorder, and they started playing wacky jingles. So during a radio period, of course, here is all these wacky jingles on WKLO for well over an hour because the chief engineer lived about 25 miles south of Louisville, and before somebody could call him, and they couldn't call the guy at the transmitter in New Albany because he's on the phone. So we had about an hour and a half, I guess, of wacky jingles on WKLO. I like that. Another thing, one time the Beatles were in Chicago at a news conference, and I'm almost ashamed to tell this one, almost. We at WAKY and they at WKLO both had disc jockeys flying up to record the news conference. I was going up for WAKY. They had a jock there, and the jock didn't know a whole lot about recorders. It's an English fellow, very popular jock at the time. So we're up there in this crowded Beatle news conference. He does not understand how to get the recorder on. He doesn't know me from Adam. So he's fiddling around with it. I said, hey, can I give you a hand? He said, oh, yeah, man, sure. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm recording this Beatles press conference. It's all right. So I pushed the thing, the record, the play button, and then pushed the safe button on the recorder, unbeknownst to him. I said, here you are. It's working now. But before I did that, there's a big crowd around here. Before I pushed the safe button, I said in the tape recorder, I said, hello there, WKLO. This is Johnny Randolph from WAKY. Never send a boy to do a man's job. Thank you. And put it on safe. And so we had the news conference on tape, and that's all they had. Guess that's all I have. Whew. All right, John, you think of anything else, let me know. Boy, that'll cover it. That's the life story right there. Thanks for asking.